and I am going to be serving as the 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan's project manager. This 2050 MTP workshop series will serve as our forum for focused and detailed group discussions on our technical components of the plan. And we have a wide range of workshop participants. As we can see, we're floating around 46 participants at the moment. That's a few too many to do individual introductions this time, but we do have representatives from Orange, Osceola, and Seminole Counties, our 20 and cities and towns, Lynx, the Florida Department of Transportation, Florida's Turnpike Enterprise, the Central Florida Expressway Authority, our 3 airports, and the Federal Highway Administration, all in attendance today. So I'm excited to see everyone here. Today, we will be discussing the background and purpose of the MTP and its role in the planning process, our roles and responsibilities in this technical workshop series, and the core tasks and activities of our 2050 MTP, and then ultimately the milestones we'll be working towards as we put together this project. At that point, we'll have an open discussion, an opportunity for public comments, and then wrap up with our next steps before we close out the meeting today. And we have a great many people signed in to the workshop this afternoon, so I do ask that if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box at any time that's located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will be pausing periodically throughout the presentation to answer any questions that are there in the Q&A box. If you would prefer to ask your question aloud, please use the raise your hand feature, which is also located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And we'll be able to answer those questions as time permits during our pauses or at the open discussion period towards the end of our agenda today. And I thank you for your understanding. So without further ado, let's get right in. The Metropolitan Transportation Plan is the foundation of how projects are federally funded within our region. The MTP serves as our long-term vision for transportation by identifying needs and prioritizing project solutions to address those long-term needs. The top priority projects are shortlisted onto our prioritized project list. And then as funding becomes available and projects are ready to move forward, the projects are then programmed into the Transportation Improvement Program. So as you can see, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan truly is the starting point for future federal funding eligibility for projects within our area. Now, there are 4 key requirements that each MTP must meet, including that it must span a 20-year planning horizon, must be updated every 5 years, and it must be fiscally constrained and include a data-informed decision-making process. The Metropolitan Transportation Plan is also multimodal and multifaceted by design, as these planning emphasis areas will ultimately shape the future of our transportation system, a few of which are exemplified here on the slide today. The MTP tasks begin with establishing the goals and objectives that we want to meet through 2050 and evaluating how we use our existing transportation system. From there, we'll then identify any future trends that we need to account for in our planning efforts as we grow within the region. Several of those topics were shown on the last slide. From there, we will complete a needs assessment, both multimodal and multifaceted, and develop a cost-feasible plan of projects and strategies that will ultimately be adopted by the MetroPlan Orlando board. As we begin the development of the 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, we will be following the simplified planning process that's here on the screen, starting with collecting our background data and existing condition information. From there, selecting our goals and objectives for 2050 and identifying those drivers of change, the future trends that could change how we plan our transportation system moving forward. Then performing the technical analyses, needs assessments, and infrastructure investment scenario planning, which we'll talk in more detail about those in a little bit. From there, the results of all of these different steps will allow us to develop the cost feasible plan, which will then ultimately be adopted in the final MTP in December of 2025. Throughout the entirety of this process, as you can see by the center of our graphic, we will have public and agency participation to guide the development of the 2050 MTP at each of these different stages. Now, just like with the technical elements of the 2050 plan, there are also several core requirements for public participation, including providing reasonable opportunities for people to be involved, making information available electronically, seeking input from traditionally underserved communities, and using visualization techniques and plain language to facilitate meaningful conversations. Our ultimate goal is to establish a thorough and inclusive engagement process that uses creative approaches to offer the public continuous opportunities to help shape the 2050 plan. We plan on accomplishing that using 4 different engagement processes. The first being our advisory committee and board meetings, which will serve as our decision-making forum at key project milestones throughout the development of the MTP. We will also have MTP technical workshops, like what we're doing today, where we're going to discuss key topics at length to make sure that we can build consensus on any methodologies or technical aspects of the plan before we go into the advisory committees and board meetings for those decision points. We will also have our interdisciplinary interviews with other interested transportation stakeholders and partners, so that way we can incorporate their unique insights into the development of the 2050 plan. And then we'll have our public engagements events throughout the development of the plan. And as those are scheduled, there will be more information provided about each one. And we are currently developing the rest of our public engagement plan for the 2050 MTP, and that will be included as a future discussion point at one of our next meetings. Now, as we convene at each of these technical workshops, we will each have roles and responsibilities to help guide the development of the MTP. We ask that each of you actively participate in this planning process by gathering input and conveying the transportation needs from your areas to the MTP team, lending us your expertise by identifying best practices and opportunities to include in the plan, providing guidance and reviewing the plan products as they become available, and serving as an ambassador for your respective organizations. And our MPO team will be preparing and presenting the content and findings from the ongoing work at these technical workshops, and you will receive the agenda for each of these workshops in advance of the meeting, which will allow you enough time to both review the agenda and determine if additional members of your staff should participate in the meeting. For example, you may want your traffic engineers to participate in a discussion on our congestion management process, or your Parks and Recreation staff to listen in when we discuss environmental topics. So the feedback from the technical workshop participants will then be reported back to the MetroPlan Orlando advisory committees, and the advisory committees will make recommendations on key project milestones to the board. I know I went through the process fairly quickly there, but do we have any questions about the MTP process so far before we dive into the detailed discussions of the core tasks and activities? And as a reminder, please use the raise your hand feature located at the bottom of your screen to be recognized, or type your questions into the Q&A box. I'm not seeing any hands raised so far. All right, well, if there are no hands raised and I don't see anything in the Q&A box, we'll just keep going. All right, so now we're going to shift from the overall 2050 MTP process to talking about each of the core tasks and activities that will be done throughout the development of our 2050 MTP plan for the region. So starting off our deep dive will be the data development and future trends evaluation, where we're going to aggregate the socioeconomic data from multiple different sources to use as the foundation for our 2050 plan. That'll include looking at historic trends, any changes that occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic, and then any systemic adaptations we've seen in our transportation network following the pandemic. Then we'll have an asset inventory of the existing system and an evaluation of how we use the current system and the travel patterns of our region. Then, as we keep mentioning, those future trends or drivers of change will be including an evaluation of those to see which will be most influential over our transportation projects over the next 5 years. What are the tides, what are the waves, and what are the ripples that we need to account for over such a long span of time? Then we will be developing overarching goals to guide and shape the development of the MTP. And this will include developing objectives used to measure the accomplishment of our goals and indicators to measure our incremental progress. So these goals will be aligned with federal and state requirements and shaped by local context. They will also incorporate performance-based planning principles and will serve as guidelines throughout the entirety of the MTP process, including our needs assessment, project prioritization, and our infrastructure investment scenario planning. And I will explain that in a few more slides. Then we have our congestion management process, which provides the information needed to manage current and future congestion in the MetroPlan Orlando area. The CMP identifies existing congestion-related impacts and improvement strategies for both people and goods, and includes a monitoring program that will periodically assess the effectiveness of the strategies over time. Then the financial resources chapter, which will serve as the foundation of our cost feasible portion of the cost feasible plan. And we will come back to talk about the cost feasible plan again in a few slides. But the financial resources section will include identifying federal and state funding sources, estimating the revenues that could potentially be available from those sources, and determining which of our transportation projects or project types within the 2050 MTP could be eligible for those different monies. We will also be coordinating with our local agencies to estimate future local funding for transportation so that the local contributions that are being made to the transportation network are highlighted and referenced in the regional long-range plan, with the intention to paint the entire picture of investment in transportation in our region and showcase the hard work that all of our agencies are doing. Then building upon the recommendations from our health strategic plan, we'll be expanding on our community and environmental strategies, directly incorporating those health strategic plan strategies and recommendations into the MTP's planning process, and also identifying strategies to better connect housing and employment and enhance access to transportation for all. Then our environmental evaluations will take place from two different perspectives. The first being, how do our transportation projects impact the environment, and what planning level screenings do we need to take to determine what those impacts are, and what are the mitigation strategies that we can implement to minimize or eliminate any of those potential impacts to enhance our preservation of the area. The second perspective is, how do we mitigate any potential environmental impacts to our transportation system? So we will be exploring different resilient strategies which may change or alter how we implement some future project recommendations. From there, we step into the needs assessment, which is the culmination of the research and the analyses that I've discussed so far today. This will include, in general, an assessment of current and future transportation needs, the evaluation of both mode-centric or mode-specific and mode-neutral perspectives, and we'll talk about both of those as I spend a little more time here on the needs assessment topic. Then we will also understand and plan for the physical, environmental, or policy constraints that are present on the transportation network, and then utilize objective and data-informed analytical approaches for a preliminary needs screening. Now, here's where we have the mode-specific portion of the needs assessment that I mentioned. This will be a multimodal evaluation, which includes the 7 focus areas that are shown here on the slide today, from safety to TSM&O to transit and freight. Each of these topics requires a specific focus to hone in on the future transportation needs for each of these different areas, and then identifying a project to address those identified needs. Now, several of these should look familiar to our planning partners throughout the region, as they have been the topics of several of the modal master plans that we've been working on for the past year. Now, our safety needs will be identified through the Vision Zero safety action plans, both regional and local, that are being developed right now through the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. Then we have our active transportation plan, which identifies our bicycle and pedestrian needs and projects to address those needs. We have our TSM&O master plan, as well as our transit vision plan underway. Got a little excited there. These other three topics will be starting soon as part of the overall MTP planning process. And the projects identified in these modal master plans will be directly incorporated into the 2050 MTP as these mode-specific project needs for each of these different categories. So now, once the mode-specific needs have been completed, we then have clear, tangible project descriptions to address those needs. And we can take a step back and look at all of these different need lists from a mode-neutral perspective and consolidate the projects to remove any potential duplications across these different lists. And if possible or feasible, bundle some of those project opportunities where it makes sense. We anticipate this needs assessment consolidation step will be both a science and an art. So there will be a number of discussions about the needs assessment components, as this could be done in a number of ways. So with those discussions in mind, we will be creating 3 different review phases for the evaluation of the different needs assessment steps. The first kind of review phase will focus on the state highway system project review. From there, we will then step into the off-system projects, so anything off the state highway system, but still eligible to receive federal funding. That will be the second review period. And the third is where we will move into the consolidation of those project needs lists. So either we're taking out any potential duplications and making sure that we're creating projects that we're ready to federalize, give the federal money, and move forward with. As we move into each of these different review stages, we will be looking for feedback on the existing and proposed projects and identifying any additional project needs for consideration. So as we get closer to each of these different review phases, additional information about what will be reviewed and the feedback being requested will be provided as we get closer to those. Now, kind of finishing up that needs assessment, I know in advance of today's meeting, I did receive a couple questions through our advisory committee process, kind of about how all this would come together. We'll pause here. Do we have any questions about the needs assessment or anything that's been discussed so far? I see one hand raised. Nabil, you are recognized. Okay, I'm not able to hear Nabil. Nabil, are you able to unmute your microphone?
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Fine. So a couple of slides back, there was a before the needs assessment slide, Taylor, there was maybe 2 or 3 where you had listed that the transit and the freight and all that stuff. I forget the name of the slide, but were they prioritized in any order, or was it just a layout?
Right. So the freight plan hasn't quite started just yet, but the transit vision plan started within the past month or so. I don't believe there are any direct recommendations that have been made as of yet. But I know the Vision Zero safety action plans, the active transportation plan, and the TSMO master plan have each developed preliminary prioritization methodologies for their mode-specific projects. And those will be kind of revisited through this 2050 MTP planning process when we do get to the prioritization step.
Got you. But is there a process by which you would actually prioritize these categories, like highway versus freight versus transit, etc.?
Right. Hold on to that question, Nabil. We're going to be talking about the prioritization, and I think that'll also become a little more clear when we talk about our infrastructure investment scenario planning
Sure.
exercise.
All right, sure. Thanks.
Of course. Do we have any other initial questions or hands raised? Oh, I see one in the chat, so I'll go ahead and read that one out loud. What is the general percentage from the current 2045 MTP of projects that have been identified that we expect to move forward to the 2050 MTP? And kind of what will the changes be between the two work efforts? So we plan to address that as part of the these three review phases. So when we begin with the 2045 MTP needs list, that's the place to start. Those were needs that were identified 5 years ago. We want to make sure that, one, we still need them. The projects that are listed there are still going to address the needs that we see through 2050. And then if there's anything that needs to be changed, added, removed, that will be part of that review process. So in answering what is the percent change, I think that will vary depending upon the area, but we will be including that as a focus for each of these three different review steps. Are there any other questions that we have at this time? Any other hands raised or anything else in the Q&A chat? All right, seeing none, I will go ahead and kind of keep moving along, starting with the prioritization. From here, once the project needs lists have been established, so we know what the needs are, what our projects are to address those needs, then we get to come into that question of what comes first. This prioritization process, we've mentioned there are some mode-specific prioritization methodologies that have been developed as part of those modal master plans. We'll be revisiting those through the MTP process to make sure that they are consistent with the MTP goals and objectives, our federal and state performance measures, and what we will be getting into with performance-based planning and our infrastructure investment scenario planning, which I promise is the next slide. We're getting there. The prioritization process is intended to be both data-driven and locally informed. So it will include those quantitative measures that we've been using since the 2045 plan's adoption back in 2020 to create a consistent region-wide prioritization methodology. But we will be including local perspectives, qualitative measures, if you will, to help raise local priorities where it makes sense. So if a jurisdiction were to fund these project needs lists locally, I'm not saying anyone will, but that's my example, which one would be first on the list for funding? That's the type of feedback that we'll be kind of looking for in that qualitative measure section. So the next step after the project needs have been completed and set, the prioritization methodology established, the next step is to evaluate the different infrastructure investment scenarios. So the purpose of this task is to determine how we can most effectively utilize our funds and resources to enhance the transportation network. So we will be evaluating our funding policies and making any necessary adjustments as we plan for 2050. From there, we'll compare infrastructure investment scenarios where we're looking at how funding is allocated within the region. So this is kind of the example of how do we change the pie chart? How do we slice that differently for 2050? What does that look like? And then as we look at those different investment scenario alternatives, those different options. We'll be comparing the outcomes from each of those alternatives using indicators from our goals and objectives, our federal and state performance measures, and future trends and drivers of change, so we can effectively and fairly evaluate each of the different alternatives that we are considered during the scenario planning process. And we can select the one or combination of different options to create the cost feasible plan. So that's where all of the hard work from the prior tasks come together, from the technical analysis, the public feedback, and our agency coordination. And this is the final list of prioritized project needs with tangible descriptions that can feasibly be funded over the next 25 years and represents our shared vision for the future of transportation within our region. So once all of that's completed, there will be a public meeting held to adopt the 2050 MTP, which will be considered final after it's adopted by the MetroPlan Orlando board. At that point, the adopted plan will then be submitted to FDOT, FHWA, and FTA. And I know that's a lot of technical talk that we've been going through. We are very early in the overall milestone schedule for the 2050 MTP. We'll be getting started with goals and objectives very soon, but there you'll see that there's a lot of work that's going to be happening over the next 2 years before the final adoption in December of 2025. So now we're kind of at the end of the prepared content of the presentation. Do we have any other questions that we would, or ideas that we'd like to discuss together? And Nabil, I will check back in with you. Was I able to answer your question sufficiently? I see your hand is back up.
Yes, thank you. But I have another one when you have a moment.
Yes, go right ahead. You are the first hand raised. You get to go
All
first.
right. So at what point does the 2045 plan, MTP, gets, if you will, implemented in the 2050? How does that process go?
I'm going to make sure I'm understanding your question. So kind of how long do we continue with the 2045 plan before the 2050 plan kind of becomes official, and that's the one we move forward with? Is that
Right, because
correct?
that has been approved, obviously. So how do you, it's a fluid process, obviously. So how do you kind of implement one into another?
Exactly. So the 2045 plan will be our adopted plan that we're following through the completion of this 2050 plans process. So through December of 2025, when we formally take action through our MetroPlan Orlando board to adopt the new 2050 plan.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, well, just to kind of expand on that answer, to give everyone a few more moments to think about if there's any other questions they have. Once the 2050 plan is adopted in December of 2025, you'll see that the project priority list, which is updated annually, will also shift to include the top priority projects from the 2050 MTP. So any projects that are in the midst of receiving funding will continue to receive funding through construction, because what we start, we always want to finish. And then new projects will be advanced according to the top priority projects identified from the 2050 MTP, which will then show up on the PPL and move forward into the TIP as they're ready and funding becomes available. And I do see in the chat there was a request for the PowerPoint presentation. So yes, this can be distributed to our attendees today. And to let everyone know, this meeting has been recorded. It should have given you a message when you joined in, and a link to this video will be available on our YouTube channel as well. And I see another question came up in the chat. What is the relationship between the Regional Safety Action Plan and the new MTP? Will those projects be first in the 2050 MTP? I won't overstate our prioritization process since we haven't quite gotten there yet. But the Vision Zero safety action plans, the projects identified there, will be directly incorporated as safety projects within the 2050 MTP. When it comes to prioritization, we'll have that discussion once the needs assessments are completed. Okay. Do we have any other questions? I saw a thank you. Glad I was able to answer your question there. And if there's no other questions at this time, go ahead and open it up for public comment.
Taylor, real quickly, there was another question in the chat submitted by Maria that she's asking, is the work being done by MetroPlan staff or our consultants?
The work is being done in combination between MetroPlan Orlando staff led by our team with support from different consultants. And then I see we have another hand raised. Thank you, Lisa, for helping me with that one. Laura, go right ahead. You're recognized.
Sorry, I couldn't type faster, so I'll just have to ask it out loud. So back to the slide that showed the plans that feed into the needs assessment, the safety action plan, the AT active transportation plan, Chesapeake master plan. For the ones that don't have sort of that feeder plan for the needs assessment, what does that needs assessment look like for resilience, freight, and roadway highway, since they don't have work already underway for that needs assessment?
Okay, thank you, Laura. And I will kind of repeat your question out loud. There was a little bit of difficulty hearing your audio. So Laura's question is about the 3 needs assessment categories: resilience, freight, and road and highway, that don't already have modal master plans completed or under development, and how those needs assessments will be completed. So those 3 needs assessments will be getting started within the next month or so, very soon, and will be completed as part of this 2050 MTP process. So you will be hearing more about those coming soon. Do we have any other questions or comments, topics that we want to make sure are included in future conversations? I will kind of say that the projects, the modal master plans that we started early, the ones that you're seeing in green text here on the needs assessment slide, were begun so that way we had plenty of time to be able to address the questions and perform the needs assessment, rather than doing it in the 3 to 4 months that would have been allocated during the standard 2050 MTP process. We stretched those out into a needs assessment over 18 to 24 months per each of these different categories to make sure we were able to have the time for true coordination with each of our partners and strong public engagement activities. I see Nabil has his hand raised. Nabil, you're recognized.
Thanks, Taylor. On the needs assessment, does that kind of follow any strategic plan that we have, transportation strategic plan, or is the needs assessment itself our strategic plan for this process?
The needs assessment is going to be our opportunity to find those new transportation projects to address our needs through 2050. How we implement those will be through our strategic process, but we will be building upon our established MPO practices and processes and policies as we move forward and implement the 2050 MTP.
So when you identify these items, then you kind of cross-check them with the strategic plan? Is that a true statement?
I believe so. I'm going to tap Alex virtually on the shoulder to see if he can help me answer this one.
Yeah, sure. So taking a step back to be able to answer your question, the strategic planning aspect of the long range plan really starts with our goals, objectives, and measures. So those are really, as Taylor spoke about earlier, we'll be at your next technical workshop, we'll be talking more about those. But those are really going to provide the compass, the guidance, the kind of the strategy direction for our prioritization and also for our investment decision making. So, whether we say safety is most important, access, connectivity, health, environment, those goals and objectives will become really the guiding framework for how we advance needs, prioritize those needs, and as we get into the investment discussions about what type of transportation system do we want to have and what do we need to get there. So the whole process, long-range planning process, the metropolitan planning process is a kind of a strategic transportation planning document. Again, it starts with goals and objectives, and our scenario planning process will help us identify alternative packages of projects that best support the end in mind.
Gotcha. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Alex. Do we have any other questions? Lisa, do we have anything else in the Q&A box?
I don't see any questions.
Okay, well, there's still an option, still plenty of time to ask questions. I will open it up for public comment though. So if anyone does wish to make a public comment, they can use the raise hand feature in Zoom or *9 on their phone keypad if they dialed in that way. Do we have anyone from the public who wishes to make a comment or ask a question? I'm not seeing any hands raised there either. They're also able to submit questions through the Q&A box or email them to MTP@MetroPlanOrlando.gov. And any questions emailed to us will be addressed kind of after this meeting. Still going slow, just in case there are any questions. I will say thank you to everyone for your active participation at our first 2050 technical workshop. The next session will be on April 11th, and you'll receive calendar holds for that item in your inbox in the near future. As Alex mentioned earlier, we will be using that time, kind of a preview for the agenda, to focus on goals and objectives for the 2050 MTP. So that'll be the primary topic that we'll be going through. But any additional items for discussion will be included on the agenda when that is distributed as well. So I'll pause one more time. Any questions? Please use the raise your hand feature or type them in the Q&A bar. Okay, not seeing any last minute questions. I say thank you again, everyone, and we'll be talking with you soon. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out. We have information on our website. You can reach out by phone or email MTP@MetroPlanOrlando.gov, and we'll be able to get back in touch with you then. So thank you.